Before delving into anything else, I want to shed light on my relationship with my sister. There's an age gap of 11 years between us. I'm currently 36, while she turned 25 this year. Her arrival wasn't exactly planned, much like mine. Our parents had me when they were just 20, so my sister's appearance 11 years later came as a surprise. Being the youngest in the family, she was indulged and pampered excessively during her childhood. Despite our age difference, I never harbored any jealousy towards her. In fact, I often spoiled her myself. Both my parents and I are dentists by profession, a path I chose out of genuine interest. When my sister expressed her desire to pursue acting, I supported her wholeheartedly. Convincing our parents to let her enroll in film school was no easy feat. They deemed it an unstable career choice reliant on luck. However, I believed in her talent and assured them of my support, even if her acting aspirations didn't pan out. This wasn't the first time I advocated for her. During her teenage years, I often persuaded our parents to let her attend parties, stay out late, or go on trips, ensuring she experienced life to the fullest. My devotion to her knew no bounds. I'd even shoulder the blame for her mistakes. Such was my affection for my little sister. Unfortunately, my well-intentioned actions seemed to have had unintended consequences. Despite our hopes that she would outgrow her brash demeanor, she only became more insolent and self-centered over the years. Nevertheless, she managed to secure a proposal from her boyfriend of 2 years, now her husband. I wasn't invited to the wedding due to a trivial disagreement, a decision that stung deeply. Despite this, I remained the most enthusiastic about her impending nuptials. She reached out to me first after the proposal, and in the following weeks, I dedicated myself to helping plan the extravagant affair she desired. Despite her struggles as an actress, she dreamt of a grand celebration, one she couldn't afford alone. My parents were generously covering my sister's wedding expenses, and her boyfriend's affluent family also contributed. With her husband's stable engineering job, financial concerns weren't pressing. I'd offered to cover her wedding dress expenses, hoping she'd opt for something sensible. Additionally, a friend owned a bridal boutique and offered us discounted rates. Initially, my sister agreed to this arrangement. However, she later expressed a desire for a designer gown costing $8,000. While I typically wouldn't object, I had already planned to fund her honeymoon as a gift. She had always dreamt of a comprehensive European tour, and I intended to surprise her with precisely that after the wedding. Given the considerable expense of the honeymoon, I hesitated to spend an additional $8,000 solely on a dress she'd wear just once. I explained my stance to my sister, highlighting that while the designer gown was extravagant, the honeymoon would create lasting memories. I suggested alternatives, such as purchasing a similar dress from my friend's boutique at a more reasonable price. However, she remained adamant about her preference for the designer label. Our disagreement over the wedding dress led to a standoff, with my sister sulking and refusing to bid me farewell when I left that day. I anticipated she'd eventually come around, but days passed without any communication. Though I had initially intended to surprise her with the details of her dream honeymoon, her prolonged silence prompted me to consider explaining my rationale for refusing the extravagant dress. After nearly a week of silence, I contemplated reaching out, but before I could, she called me. I expected an apology for her immature behavior, but instead, she launched into accusations, questioning why I was being cheap. Her words cut deep, particularly her jab about my lack of a family. It struck a nerve because my decision to remain single and childless was a deliberate one, and her insensitivity stung, especially coming from my own sister. Her disregard for my feelings, despite knowing how sensitive I am about this topic, left me feeling hurt and betrayed. It seemed she was intentionally trying to provoke me. I found myself deeply offended by my sister's sudden change in attitude. This side of her, typically reserved for those she dislikes, had never been directed at me before. The shock of her demeanor shift caught me off guard, especially considering I had never denied her anything before. It was a complete turnaround simply because I refused to indulge her desire for an exorbitantly priced wedding gown. Expressing my displeasure, I reminded her that her disrespectful behavior was unwarranted, particularly since I was footing the bill for her dress. In response, she belittled my life choices, insinuating that buying things for her wedding was my attempt to fill my empty existence. She even went as far as calling me jealous of her impending marriage, emphasizing my single status as I approached 40. Unable to bear such disrespect, I ended the call abruptly. For the next few days, I nursed my wounds in silence, deeply hurt by her words. The sister I had supported and cared for was now using hurtful words against me over a trivial disagreement about a dress. Despite our parents' reassurances that things would eventually mend, I felt disheartened as the weeks passed without reconciliation. After 2 months of silence, the realization struck when I noticed the absence of a wedding invitation among our relatives. It dawned on me that our fight had severed our bond to the point where she had no intention of inviting me to her wedding. I took the situation to heart, feeling deeply hurt by my sister's actions. Despite always going the extra mile to make her happy, I found myself treated with disrespect. Even for her wedding, I was prepared to spare no expense, intending to sponsor the honeymoon of her dreams. However, upon realizing I hadn't received an invitation to her wedding, I grappled with disappointment for some time. Eventually, I came to terms with the reality of my sister's character. She exhibited traits of narcissism and self-centeredness, incapable of genuine care or love unless there was something in it for her. With this realization, I made the decision to cut ties, blocking her from all my social platforms and ceasing communication. However, during a dinner with my parents a couple of months ago, fueled by champagne, I confessed the true reason behind my refusal to buy her the extravagant dress and my intention to gift her a Europe trip. Although I later sobered up and made my parents promise not to disclose this to my sister, they broke their word. On the morning of her wedding, my sister unexpectedly appeared at my door. Startled and unprepared, I hesitated to let her in. Instead, I called her to inquire about her sudden visit. She politely requested entry, but I stood my ground, refusing to entertain her presence. Despite her attempts to reconcile, I couldn't overlook the disrespect she had shown me. Her sudden change of heart puzzled me, leading me to suspect our mother had divulged the details of the original gift I had planned for her. Confirming my suspicions, she admitted to knowing about my intended surprise, expressing remorse for her past behavior and extending an invitation to her wedding as a gesture of reconciliation. If only she had chosen to deny any knowledge of the gift and expressed genuine remorse for her actions, perhaps I would have reconsidered. But instead, she lacked the foresight to fabricate a plausible excuse and confessed to being motivated solely by the revelation of the intended gift. It was a bitter realization that had our mother not disclosed this information, she wouldn't have bothered inviting me to her wedding either. Her insistence on making amends fell on deaf ears as I stood firm in my decision to keep her at bay. Despite her protests and pleas, I remained resolute, unwilling to entertain her attempts at reconciliation. Her audacity to suggest that I couldn't dismiss her presence on her wedding day only fueled my frustration. I snapped, informing her that her last-minute invitation held no significance for me, and I had no intention of attending her wedding. As she continued to argue over the phone, insisting on the importance of her personal invitation, I chose to end the conversation once more. However, her outburst outside my door, hurling insults and even kicking it, only exacerbated the situation. Though tempted to involve the authorities, the early hour and my grogginess dissuaded me, opting instead to return to sleep and address the matter with my mother later. It was a struggle to shake off the lingering upset as I tried to drift back into sleep. Finally, succumbing to exhaustion, I managed to doze off, only to be jolted awake by the incessant buzzing of my phone. Groggily, I answered the call from an unfamiliar number, thinking it might be work-related. To my dismay, it was my sister's husband on the line. Without preamble, he launched into a tirade, joined by their friends, hurling insults and laughter my way. stunned by the onslaught. I could barely comprehend their words amidst the cacophony of abuse. After enduring the verbal assault for what felt like an eternity, I hung up in disbelief. Minutes later, I called my mother, seeking answers. She confessed to revealing the details of the intended honeymoon to my sister the evening before the wedding, hoping it would prompt her to seek reconciliation. Regrettably, her actions backfired, and I found myself subjected to further humiliation. My mother was unaware of the phone call, as she had been outside with her friends, taking photos. She expressed shock and remorse at their behavior, but I couldn't share her sentiment. This petty and spiteful display was characteristic of my sister, and I found myself seething with anger, not just towards her, but also towards my mother for her misguided intervention. For the next few hours, I stewed in my room, silently fuming and plotting my next move. Anger simmered within me, directed not just at my sister, but at my mother as well. Despite my mother's well-meaning intentions, I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal and humiliation. However, I recognized her genuine desire to mend things, and in time, I forgave her. Yet, my sister's behavior demanded a response. Resorting to legal action seemed futile and would only cast me as the villain. Instead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Channeling my frustration and spite, I impulsively booked tickets for a European adventure, inviting a friend to join me. It wasn't solely an act of retaliation, but also a personal endeavor to inject some excitement into my life. I had always played it safe, shying away from spontaneity, but this trip was a departure from that pattern. As my friend and I embarked on our journey, I documented our experiences on social media, fully aware that word would eventually reach my sister. Purposefully keeping mutual connections intact, I ensured she would learn of my exploits. True to expectation, news of my travels reached her, leaving her devastated. While my actions achieved the desired effect, eliciting remorse from my sister, I couldn't ignore the backlash from others. My mother, in particular, admonished me for being petty and failing to consider the significant age gap between us before proceeding with my plan. Her words struck a chord, and I couldn't shake the feeling of regret. Despite my sister's remorse and the sympathy from those around me, I couldn't escape the nagging guilt. As the dust settled, I found myself grappling with conflicting emotions, questioning the righteousness of my actions, and feeling remorseful for the pain I had caused. In hindsight, I realized that perhaps I had gone too far in seeking retribution, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being a jerk. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude for all the supportive comments and reassurance. Your kindness truly means a lot to me, especially during this difficult time. Some of you have pointed out that I may have been foolish in my actions towards my sister, and I agree. I realize now that I went overboard in trying to please her and ended up spoiling her more than she deserved. I suppose I was somewhat of a pushover because I believed that family would never treat me poorly, but I've learned otherwise. Additionally, I've come to recognize the unfair treatment I've received from my parents, particularly due to our significant age gap. Just because I'm 11 years older doesn't mean my feelings are any less valid. It's frustrating that my parents have chosen to intervene now that my sister is upset, despite taking a step back when I needed their support earlier. Although I haven't confronted them about this yet, I plan to address it if my mother reaches out to me again. It's been 4 days since our last conversation, and while I anticipate she may contact me soon, I'm prepared to discuss my concerns with her. During our last phone call, I noticed my father whispering to my mother, indicating he had thoughts to share but refrained from doing so to avoid adding to the drama. While I didn't mention it previously, given the current circumstances, I feel compelled to vent and express my frustrations. I'm still on my trip, putting on a brave face when I'm out with my friend to avoid dampening his spirits. However, internally, I'm grappling with a whirlwind of emotions and feeling pretty upset about the entire situation. Update 2. After nearly 3 weeks of silence, my mother finally reached out to me, not to apologize, but to inform me that my parents had decided it would be best if we didn't meet for a while to avoid upsetting my sister. It's apparent that my feelings hold little importance to them. Adding insult to injury, she revealed that they were sponsoring my sister's trip to Barrie, further highlighting their blatant favoritism. I couldn't help but sarcastically commend my mother for her sudden proactive maternal behavior, albeit at the expense of meddling in my sister's affairs. I expressed my wish for her to have shown the same concern for me when I was struggling with my sister's silent treatment over a trivial matter like a dress, and then promptly ended the call. Shortly after, my father reached out via text, admonishing my behavior towards my mother and insisting I rectify the situation if we were to maintain a semblance of a relationship. I tersely dismissed his admonitions, blocking him without further ado. I've resolved not to allow my family to disrupt my holiday any longer. Fighting for their attention seems futile, especially at my age. I refuse to be dragged into the high school-like drama orchestrated by my sister and enabled by my parents. Having invested a significant sum into this tour, I'm determined to make the most of it. While I hadn't confided in my friend about the familial turmoil until now, today I decided to open up to him. He reassured me that the issue lies not with me, but with my family's favoritism towards my sister. His words were a much-needed reality check, affirming that it's time for me to extricate myself from this toxic dynamic. For too long, I've harbored hope that my family would come around, but now I understand that's unlikely and I'm finally at peace with it. Update 3. I'm back from my European adventure after almost 6 weeks of exploring the streets of various countries. I don't want to come across as preachy, but this trip has truly transformed me and reshaped my outlook on life. I feel like a completely different person now, which is probably why I'm not bothered by the fact that my parents have disinherited me. It's okay. I have enough income to support myself. On a happier note, something unexpected happened during the trip. My friend, the one I traveled with, and I are now together. It happened about a week ago when we were sharing a bottle of wine. He confessed that he had feelings for me for quite some time, and to my surprise, I realized that I felt the same way. We've been friends for almost 8 years, and while I had harbored feelings for him, I was afraid to ruin our friendship by admitting them. But now we're together, and I couldn't be happier. Reflecting on everything that has happened, the drama with my sister, the fallout with my parents, it all seems insignificant now. This vacation was exactly what I needed for myself, regardless of any desire for revenge or validation from my family. I'm genuinely grateful for the experience and the newfound happiness it has brought me.